Danny Toyo surprise.
Cinderella, adapted from Perrault. Once upon a time there was a gentleman who married for his second wife the proudest, vainest, and most selfish woman that ever was seen. She had 2 daughters, who were exactly like her in all things. The gentleman had also a daughter, but she was a young girl of the rarest sweetness and goodness. The mother could not bear the goodness of this young girl, because it made the pride and ill temper of her own daughters appear the more ugly. So she gave her the hardest work in the house to do, in order that none of their visitors might notice her. She had to scour the dishes, scrub the floors, and clean the whole house from top to bottom. She had to sleep in the attic, upon a wretched bed of straw, while her sisters lay in fine rooms on the very softest beds. The young girl bore all this patiently, nor did she make her father unhappy by complaining to him of her lot. When she had done her work, she used to go into the chimney corner and sit down among the cinders. Hence, though her name was Ella, she was called by her sisters Cinderella. Cinderella had only the poorest rags for clothes, but the sweetness and goodness that shone in her face made her 100 times more beautiful than her sisters, however richly they might be dressed. It once happened that the king's son gave a very grand ball, to which all the great people of the kingdom were invited. Our young misses were highly delighted to receive an invitation. At once they began to busy themselves in choosing the gowns, petticoats, and head-dresses which they should wear. The poor little Cinderella was not invited. Yet as she worked to get her sisters ready to go, they talked the whole day long of nothing but what they should do at the ball. "For my part," said the elder, "I shall wear my red velvet suit with French trimmings." "And I," said the younger, "shall wear my old skirt, but then, to make up for that, I shall put on my gold-flowered mantle and my splendid diamond stomacher." Though Cinderella was sad to think she must stay at home, she offered very sweetly to dress her sisters' hair. There was no one who could do it so well, and they gladly consented. Yet, even as she worked, they said unkind things to her. "Cinderella, don't you wish you could go to the ball? But people would surely laugh to see a Cinder girl at a ball." Cinderella made no answer. She went on arranging their hair. So at last she had them looking as well as 2 young misses could, whose faces expressed nothing but pride and ill temper. They paraded up and down before the long mirrors in their rooms, and then they got into the family coach and drove away to court. Cinderella looked after them until they were far out of sight. Then she crept into her corner by the chimney and fell softly a-crying. But Cinderella, like all good girls, was watched over by a fairy godmother, and as she sat there in tears, her good fairy appeared before her. "My dear, dear child," said the queer little old lady, "why are you crying?" "I wish I could—" Cinderella could not finish for sobbing. "You wish," said the fairy, "that you could go to the ball? Is not that so?" "Yes, oh yes," answered Cinderella, sighing. "Well," said the fairy, "be but a good girl, and I will see that you go." Then she commanded the dear child to run into the garden and bring her a pumpkin. Cinderella went obediently and gathered the finest she could find, but she hadn't the smallest idea how a pumpkin could help her get to the ball. Her fairy godmother scooped out all the inside, leaving nothing but the rind. Then she struck it with her wand, and behold! the pumpkin became a splendid gilded coach. Next the fairy godmother went to look into the mouse-trap, where she found 6 mice. She ordered Cinderella to lift the trap-door, and as each mouse ran out, she gave it a tap with her wand. At once the mouse was changed into a horse, till before them stood 6 fine horses of a beautiful mouse-colored gray. Then she had Cinderella bring her the rat trap. In that was a very large rat with splendid whiskers, and she turned him into a coachman. Last of all she said, "Go into the garden, Cinderella, and bring me 6 lizards you will find behind the watering pot." No sooner had Cinderella done as she was commanded than the lizards became 6 footmen in gold-embroidered coats. They skipped up at once behind the coach, and sat there as grandly as though they had done nothing all their lives but serve in such a position. The fairy then said to Cinderella, "Now you see a carriage fit to take you to a ball. Are you not pleased with it?" "Oh, yes," cried Cinderella, "but must I go as I am in these rags?" Her godmother simply touched her with her wand, and at the same moment her clothes were turned into cloth of gold and silver, all decked with jewels. Then the fairy gave her a pair of the prettiest glass slippers in the world, and said, as she stepped joyously into the carriage, "This one command only you must obey. Do not on any account stay at the ball after midnight. If you do, your coach will become a pumpkin again, your horses mice, your coachman a rat, your footmen lizards, and your clothes the same rags you wore before." Cinderella promised to obey, and then she drove away. The king's son, being told that a great princess whom nobody knew was come to the ball, ran out to receive her. He gave her his hand as she alighted from the carriage, and led her into the hall where the company was gathered. At once when she appeared, there fell over all a deep silence. Everyone left off dancing, and the violins ceased to play. On all sides ladies and gentlemen whispered, "How beautiful she is!" The king's son conducted her to the seat of honor, and afterwards led her out to dance. She danced so gracefully that all admired her. She was kind and courteous too, even to her ill-tempered step-sisters, who did not for the moment recognize in this lovely princess their little Cinder girl. At last a splendid feast was served, but in the midst of it all Cinderella heard the clock strike the quarter before 12. She rose and said farewell. Then she hastened away as fast as she could. When she got back home she found her godmother waiting. Gratefully she thanked the little old lady for what she had done, but as she was telling her all that had happened, the 2 sisters knocked at the door, and the fairy changed Cinderella's brocaded gown to rags again, and disappeared in a twinkling. In her poor old clothes Cinderella opened the door. "If you had been at the ball," said one of her sisters, "you would have seen the finest, most beautiful princess that ever your eyes looked on. She was very kind to us too, and showed us much attention. But a little Cinder girl like you could never even dream of such loveliness." Cinderella asked if they knew the name of the princess. "No," the stepsisters answered. "No one knows her name, but the king's son would give all in the world to learn who she is." The next night the prince asked everyone again to a ball, that he might once again see the beautiful princess. Cinderella's 2 sisters went, and when they were gone and the house was still, her godmother came as before and made Cinderella ready. The dress she wore on the second night was even more lovely than the one she had had at first. The king's son welcomed her with beaming eyes, and was always by her side. They danced with the same grace and beauty to the same lovely music, and they feasted as before. But when the clock struck a quarter to 12, Cinderella remembered her godmother's words and went obediently home. The third night the king's son gave still another ball. Once again the 2 sisters went, and after them Cinderella. Not a thing was less fine and splendid, not a person less kind and courteous than on the 2 nights preceding. Indeed, the music was so beautiful, the movements of the dance were such wonders of harmony and grace. The night was so bright, and everything was so full of joy that Cinderella never once thought how time was flying. Suddenly the great clock of the palace began to strike 12. 1, 2, 3, 4. When she heard, Cinderella fled. Nimbly as a deer she ran. 5, 6, 7, 8. She was on the broad steps outside the palace. 9, 10. One little glass slipper fell from her foot, but she dared not stop to pick it up. 11, 12. Her clothes all turned to rags. Her coach disappeared. Mice, lizards, and rats scampered off in the darkness. As fast as she could, Cinderella ran home. All she had left of her finery was one little glass slipper, the mate to the one she had lost. In great dismay the prince ran out from the palace after her. Not a sign of her was anywhere to be seen. The guards at the gate said no splendid princess had passed them. They had seen nobody but a poorly dressed country girl, who ran as if for her life. The prince was very sorrowful, and he had a search made everywhere. But all he could find of the beautiful princess was the one little glass slipper she had dropped. For days and days he searched. Then at last he had his servitors march up and down through the length and breadth of his kingdom, giving notice with sound of trumpet that every lady in the land should try on the little glass slipper. So small it was he knew that none but the rightful princess could wear it. Hence he gave orders that whoever could get her foot into it should come to the palace and be his bride. They began by trying the slipper on the princesses, then on the duchesses, then on the other ladies of the court. Not one of them did it fit. At last it was brought to Cinderella's two proud sisters, who each did all she could to squeeze in her foot. They pinched up their heels and drew in their toes, but in vain. Cinderella meantime stood by and watched what was going on. She knew her slipper, and when her sisters had failed, she said to them modestly, "Let me see if it will not fit me." The sisters burst out a-laughing. "Could a Cinder girl wear such a slipper?" they cried. But the messenger who was sent out on the search looked earnestly at Cinderella, and finding her very beautiful, he said it was but fair she should try it. So Cinderella sat down, and the gentleman put the slipper on her foot. Behold, it went on easily and fitted her like wax. The two sisters were dumb with amazement, but their amazement was greater still when Cinderella pulled out of her pocket the mate to that beautiful slipper. Thereupon in came her good fairy, who touched the girl's clothes with her wand, and lo, they became more magnificent than any she had worn before. And now her two sisters found her to be that beautiful lady who had been so kind to them at the ball. They threw themselves at her feet to beg pardon for all their ill treatment of her. Cinderella lifted them, kissed them, and said she forgave them with all her heart. She was conducted to the young prince, dressed as she was. He thought her more charming than ever, and a few days later led her as his bride to live with him at the palace. Cinderella, who was as good as she was beautiful, gave her two sisters a home at court. Her goodness made them ashamed of themselves, so they tried to conquer their pride and ill temper, and grow to be better young misses.
Bye bye friends. Please subscribe,